I am the curator of a museum of dust, and basically it's an excuse to go all over the place and talk to people. Well, the idea is the little tiny bottles of dust, which I've gathered, evoke a character, an event, or a location, and I write about it. And the idea is that I'm going to put a book together,
right? Because
I've got quite good stories.
Hello, and welcome to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. I'm Jonathan Tulloch, and I'm delighted to say that I have Sally Kindberg with me here today. Now, Sally, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Jonathan, and it's very nice to see you again.
It's lovely. We're often bumping into each other at RLF functions.
Yes, we were.
Yeah.
We were.
So, big question. Are you an artist, a visual artist, a writer, a comic strip writer, or an astronaut?
An astronaut? Yes. Funnily, you should say that, because when I was a child, that's what I wanted to be. But I haven't managed it yet. I think probably that's not going to happen. But I do write and draw, and one thing kind of merges into another. And I love doing the comic strips. That's my best thing. And in fact, I was a very, very late reader. I couldn't get it at all.
Really?
No, terribly late. Just didn't click. And I tried really hard, and my mum was busy having babies and stuff, and she didn't really take much notice. I loved comics, and we were allowed to read any comic that we liked.
So which ones did you read?
Beano, Dandy. But I followed the action by looking at the speech bubbles. So I must have I knew what was happening, you know. And then one day, I had a copy of my grandmother's Grimm's Fairy Tales, and I looked at it, and suddenly I could read. And I was so shocked that I closed the book because I thought it might be a temporary thing. And I thought, well, will it last? So I closed the book and counted, I don't know, just had a pause and opened it again. And I could read, and it was just so amazing.
Can you remember what story it was?
I think it was about the boy that couldn't shiver. Or it might have been Rumpelstiltskin, but it might have been a different set.
Were you frightened by them?
No, because I think home life was quite frightening. I think that's why I liked fairy tales, because it sort of normalised things that were very inexplicable in my family.
Yeah.
So, which was quite nice.
I'm glad you've got this strong reaction, because it leads us perfectly to one of our main topics of conversation today, which is Winnie-the-Pooh, one of the first books many people read as a child.
Yes.
You know, and obviously Grimm's is a bit heavier, high tar cigarette, not silk cut. But did you read Winnie-the-Pooh? Because the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's 100 years since you wrote it.
I know it is. Well, I read it last night, actually, which is a bit bizarre. But it's very calming. It's really calming, and it's really delightful. And there's a lot of optimism in it. And
you like Piglet?
I like Piglet.
Why do you like Piglet?
I like Piglet because when he's upset and he can't find Pooh, he goes home and pulls the covers over his head. Now, I'm not saying that that's what I do, but I did get caught in an earthquake once, and I was on the top, I think it was the 3rd floor, and I really didn't know what to do, because I know my mother had said, don't go to this particular place because they have earthquakes. And I said, don't be daft, Mum, they're not going to have an earthquake. And I suddenly heard all these donkeys baying and cats meowing and dogs barking. And then there was a huge crash. And I heard my friend, because I was staying with a couple, I heard my friend Rob say to his wife, what's happening? What's happening? And my friend said, it's all right, Rob, just go back to sleep. It's a bad dream. And I thought, no, there's something very wrong. But I couldn't remember whether you're supposed to get out of the building or just stay where you were.
So did you, was
I
that when you
pulled the covers over my
and
head.
went to Piglet? You're in a Piglet? Is that?
Piglet.
Right.
Yes.
So do you think this isn't a therapy session, right? And I don't know why I'm asking this, but take all the characters from Winnie-the-Pooh. Are you Piglet? I know you like to go to Piglet, but...
No, I think I'm probably take it in turns with them. Eeyore, probably. Poor old Eeyore. I think he's a bit miserable about.
Do you think all writers are Eeyore deep down?
What, miserable?
Yeah. Are most writers like Eeyore?
I think you take it in turns. I don't think you'd be Eeyore all the time. That would be, you'd never write a word, would you? Really, you'd be worried about you losing your tail, or it's not your birthday. Is your birthday not being celebrated? It would be terribly boring. But one of the things that I love about Winnie-the-Pooh is that when I'm running bridge workshops with sixth form and I do a little introduction about the RLF, they haven't heard of any of the people that I've mentioned who have been helped by the RLF. You know, they just look blank. Mm-hmm. If you say, whoever, D.H. Lawrence, it is blank. And I say, well, actually, I'm sort of paid by Winnie-the-Pooh, and I explain.
That's lovely, yeah.
And they recognise, oh, really, you know. Yeah. But otherwise, you know, Dylan Thomas, not a clue.
Winnie-the-Pooh. And that's why it's lovely the RLF has such a strong link with Winnie-the-Pooh.
It's brilliant,
you know,
yes.
When all of us are a bit hard up, I think we have the inner piglet to help us, you know, like with the help that the RLF gives us. And in fact, Queen Camilla is going to visit Ashdown Forest, home of the 100-acre wood. And as a nature writer obsessive, I've been thinking, is 100 acres big for a wood? Don't know, do you reckon? Can you picture 100 acres?
No, big.
Quite big. Not a forest, but definitely a wood.
Yeah.
On the Winnie-the-Pooh thing, what interests me when I was thinking of you talking about it was, like, when I think of Winnie-the-Pooh, I think of the cartoon visually straight away, you know, the pictures from the cartoon. And then I think of the drawings. It's not so much the words as the drawings of Winnie-the-Pooh.
I think the shepherd's drawings are delightful. They really are. And his nature drawings are gorgeous, actually. There's not as many drawings as I thought there would be in the books. So it gives the child, it gives you space to kind of build it up in your head.
Yes.
Which is lovely.
Yeah. Because he did Wind in the Willows as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And with such loving care that the damselfly is a large red damselfly. You know, the actual picture of a damselfly, you can identify it.
Yes. Yeah. They're very delicate drawings in some way, but very lively. The other thing I thought was interesting is that both AA Milne and Shepherd were in the First World War and must have seen horrific things, and yet they can have this sort of come up with this idyllic story, really.
Yes.
Full of optimism.
A healing story.
Yes, but full of optimism.
I'd love us to listen to something now, if that's okay, Sally. The RLF have built up this archive of recordings of writers like you and I talking about the writing life. I think it's been going on for over 10 years. So it really gives a good, balanced experience of what a writer's life is like.
Yeah.
Far from the bright lights of the city. The Eeyore moments, maybe, or the Tigger moments as well, you know, in the writing life. So I'd like us to listen to Sally Klein on how her reading AA Milne changed her life.
Over the years, as an adult, many books have inspired me. Some have altered my outlook. But there was just one book in particular that transformed my attitude to life. When I was given the book, I was 4 years old, with straight black hair that never curled, and I didn't smile much. I was a small, sad child with a beleaguered background that had left me scared and anxious, a misery and a pessimist most of the time. The book was Winnie-the-Pooh, written by AA Milne in 1926. It's the story of a speaking teddy bear owned by Milne's son, Christopher Robin. That book turned my life round and showed me how to be an optimist. It was and is the funniest, most sunny-spirited book I've read. Pooh, the central character, a warm, friendly bear, is an incurable optimist. He's fun, cheerful, up for adventures, trustworthy and kind. He was like no one I'd ever met in the first 4 years of my actual life. Pooh's character, though unique, led me to wonder if there were other bears, or even better, if there were other people who were audacious, caring, reliable, and above all, positive. There was a humorous absurdity about my first meeting with Winnie-the-Pooh. AA Milne begins his book with these words. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, about last Friday, Winnie-the-Pooh lived in a forest all by himself under the name of Sanders. Christopher Robin, Pooh's human friend, decides to ask the narrator exactly what I wanted to ask. What does under the name mean? The ever-helpful narrator reliably informs us that it means he had the name on the door in gold letters and lived under it. Christopher Robin, grateful but as always ready to make Pooh the fall guy, says quickly, Winnie-the-Pooh wasn't quite sure. To make sure, we were all sure, the wonderful artist Ernest Shepherd drew an illustration of Pooh sitting contentedly on a log outside his house in the 100-acre wood, while above his head are two signs. One does indeed say Mr. Saunders. The other, written and misspelt, I assume by Pooh, says Renig also, the wrong spelling for ring. Spelling preoccupies Pooh, who likes the idea of it, but who's forced to admit to his wise friend Owl, well, my spelling is wobbly. It's good spelling, but it wobbles, and the letters get in the wrong places. Spelling is definitely not Pooh's forte, nor was it mine at 4, nor at 14, nor at 40. Indeed, in my first job application letter to the editor of the News Chronicle and the Evening Star in Fleet Street the week before I left university, I told the editor why I wanted to write for his newspaper, and I spelt because the way I usually spelt it, which was B-E-C-O-S, because pure Pooh literacy.
Wow, that's interesting. Sally, did you have a teddy bear as a child?
No. Oh, yes, I did, actually, but my brother operated on it, so that does resonate with me, although I didn't read Winnie-the-Pooh. It wasn't read to me, or I didn't have it when I was a child. My childhood was a bit strange, but quite a kind of rich childhood in some ways, because all sorts of things happened, which I've since kind of incorporated into my work. But what happened was I had to live with my grandmother some of the time, and she lived in a very spooky house in Nottingham, which was absolutely terrifying. And because my mum wasn't there, I was quite a difficult child. And one of the things I wouldn't do was brush my hair. And I grew my hair was really wild, and it was full of, I don't know if you have this word, it's called cots. When you have tangles,
No.
It might be a Nottingham thing.
Yeah.
Cots in your hair. You know when you can't get the comb through it? And my grandmother got very angry with me, and so she read me this book, and this is the book that influenced me quite a lot, which is Struwell Peter, which is quite terrifying, actually.
Yeah, what is it? I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's 1820s or something like that. It's very crudely, it's woodcuts, crudely coloured, which I adored, and it's all warnings for children. What will happen if you don't behave? And so my grandmother said, look, this is what you're going to look like if you don't have your hair brushed, or you let us brush your hair or comb your hair. And instead of going, oh, I said, wow, I want to be Struwell Peter. And I have to say,
I must say, you've got like a lovely tinge of blue to your hair now as you sit in there.
But years later, I wrote and illustrated a book about hair, and I over-researched it like mad, and I've got a picture of me at the front, not on the cover, but in the front, with wild hair. It's not as wild as it used to be. I haven't got as much hair. but
I could see you when we were coming here, like on Whitechapel Road. I could see, that must be Sally, because you turned, this is honestly, you turned to look at a piece of graffiti on the wall as if it was an artwork.
I did.
And I thought, that must be an artist. And then I saw the blue hair.
But this book had completely the wrong effect on me, because I loved it. It was horrible stories. I mean, it was like the dangers of a child playing with matches, and this little girl sets fire to herself, and all the cats come out and try and put the fire out with their tears. I mean, it was just dreadful. But I thought it was hilarious, and I think there's probably something a bit skewed.
No, it's good to laugh, isn't it?
But I do feel that, actually, that in my life, when things have been really scary, I've managed to deal with them by finding humour. I'm really lucky that I can find that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
Yeah. Aren't you doing quite because you've done loads of great comic strip books and stuff and that kind of thing. Aren't you got quite a big project to do with this childhood in Nottingham and that Stuart Peter and all of that stuff?
Yes, yeah. It keeps shifting. I'm absolutely hopeless without deadlines because I'm used to working to really tight newspaper or publishers' deadlines.
Yeah.
And I haven't.
Because you were a travel correspondent, weren't you?
I was very brief for about 2 years.
Yeah.
But I was more of an illustrator for newspapers like Guardian and Independent. And I started writing travel stuff after illustrating maps for the Independent and various magazines. Basically, I wanted to write a mystery memoir, but because some of it was quite interesting. But of course, it's got to interest other people. It's got to relate to other people. And the background of this is that my mum came from quite a wealthy family, but was the black sheep of the family because she married a foreigner and danced the tango. So, and she married Mr. Kindberg.
Yeah, where's that name from?
Just before, during the war.
Is it Swedish?
Finnish.
Finnish, right.
At that time, she was living in Devon. She married the mysteriously elusive Mr. Kindberg, who then went back to Finland to fight off the Russians to defend the border, the eastern border, and he disappeared. We don't exactly know what happened to him. And my mum went into a kind of strange kind of state, I think. Years later, obviously, I was born, so I'm not Mr. Kindberg's daughter, but I have his name because I'd like the name. So, but she was married to him.
Right.
The story that I'm drawing and writing is about these mysterious letters that arrive from Sweden from somebody that she said was my father. But I can't tell you any more than that. Right. So you have to buy the book.
Oh, I will do. I've seen it on your website. The first page looks great.
I suspect the answer to all these mysteries is probably something quite banal. I don't know, but it's made me do it. It's made this story come out, and I quite enjoy it actually. But it doesn't please the family, probably.
No, but I mean, you have to do what you do.
Yeah, well, most of them are dead anyway. So.
Yeah. Well, it frees us up, doesn't it? What I really wanted, I was excited to talk to you. I wanted to ask you, because I wonder if you're one of the few human beings on the planet who has heard of, because I'd like to ask you a little bit about the expertise, your expertise as a curator of strange museums, right? You are, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Can you tell me and tell the listeners, who is Little Titch?
Oh, well, Little Titch was a music hall performer. And the reason I got interested in him was because I went to a free musical event at the National Portrait Gallery. And the musicians were playing early 20th century, late 19th century music. And one of the pieces was by Stravinsky. And I started drawing in my notebook. And after the piece was over, one of the musicians said that you might have noticed that during the course of this music, the Stravinsky, it goes like this.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's that? And apparently Stravinsky was very keen on music hall, and he'd been to see this performance of Little Titch. And Little Titch is a very tiny person, as you might gather, but with enormously long feet. And he did this dance where he'd go up on his toes and do a somersault. And the music, Stravinsky put it in his music. And I was delighted with this. And I drew it in my notebook, put it on my blog. And the musician picked it up, and then the National Portrait Gallery picked it up. So that was really, it was just...
So your skill as a drawer has led to...
It was a terrible drawing, actually, but...
Do you know, this is fascinating you say about Stravinsky, because do you know where else Little Titch crops up? And I was amazed by this. George Orwell was a massive fan of Little Titch.
No!
Yeah. In his... there's like a 20-volume edition of his letters and diaries and stuff. And he used to go and see Little Titch a lot.
Oh my goodness, I don't know. I didn't know that at all. But there's another coincidence, may I tell you? Well, there's two coincidences. One is that I got very keen on this group of people called the House of Automata. They had a workshop up in Scotland, and I asked if I could go and draw there and talk to them about it. But while I was there, they were restoring an automaton of Little Titch. And I got some dust from Little Titches.
Yeah, because aren't you a curator of the Museum of Dust?
Yes, I am the curator of a Museum of Dust. And basically it's an excuse to go all over the place and talk to people. Well, the idea is the little tiny bottles of dust, which I've gathered, evoke a character, an event, or a location, and I write about it. And the idea is that I'm going to put a book together.
Right. Because
I've got quite good stories. I mean, the stories of people who wouldn't give me dust are quite interesting, like the Queen.
So what do you mean, give you dust? What would that mean if say...
Well, just like a little bottle of dust.
Just like, what's soil or...
No, it's dust from that particular place.
Right, okay.
I wanted some from Buckingham Palace. And I knew somebody whose son worked in the palace. And I said, can you get me some dust? And they said, no, he might lose his job. And I said, well, can't he do it discreetly? I mean, you know.
How did you get the dust from Little Titch then?
Oh, I've got a miniature dustpan and brush, which unfortunately, while
brilliant.
I was exhibiting at the Art Workers Guild, a child ate some of the brush. So,
so
I don't have it anymore.
But I love that would begin with the drawing, you know, like the Little Titch and everything, and this whole museum stuff.
I love it. That sort of.
So you created a new medium. You know, we can write and we can draw, but collecting the dust.
It's been so interesting, and recently it was lovely because I went up to, one of my heroes was Edith Sitwell.
Yes, yeah.
And I went up to Renishaw House, which is the Sitwell ancestral home, including somebody called Sitwell, by the way. They made money from iron and coal. Anyway, I met Edith Sitwell's great niece, Alexandra, and got talking to her and said, look, can I ask you something a bit strange? And she said, yes, go ahead. And I said, do you think I could have some dust from Edith's room? Oh. And she said, no, I can't let you go in, but I'll send you some. I thought, well, she's not going to, you know. A week later, a tiny jam jar, you know those Tiptree
really
jam...
small, yeah.
Arrived.
Just enough for a couple of slices
in the
of toast. Yeah.
With Sitwell dust. So it's gone into my museum.
So how many, what can we call, we can't say characters, but personas or collections of dust have you got?
I've got about 30.
Right.
One was I was a bit worried about because I interviewed an archaeologist who was working on a 2nd century Roman house. This was for a book, a children's book, and got talking to her, and she sent me some 2nd century house dust from a Roman villa.
Wow.
And when I was decanting it, I got it up my nose and I was sneezing like mad. And I thought, oh my God, I've ingested germs from the 2nd century. And I'll have to go to my GP and I'll say, where have you been? You know, what this is very unusual. I'd already made this scenario, you know.
I love this, you know.
And luckily nothing happened.
So I'd love it if we could now listen to another writer talking about how a place has shaped her work, and in this case it's London, with Vayu Naidu.
Writing for me begins with contradictions. If it is historical fiction or reimagining a classic, I need to sit amidst the bustle of London. The arc and texture are sketched walking through its spaces. There are islands of wooded groves and parks before meeting the Thames. Crossing one of 3 bridges, Battersea, Albert or Chelsea, there is an exhilaration in huddling behind the hissing veil of spluttering coffee machines in either a high street cafe or a museum. The boom of coffee machines are a necessary filter from intermittent conversations around me, and indeed the occasional wailing glory of an irate infant. Glory because wailing is an enviable expression of how we adults too can feel when writing hits a speed breaker. I certainly want to just have a good cry with the hope of falling asleep and being safely bundled to the writing zone. My beat across London takes me north and south and east. Each side has a map of variations on language and rounded and jagged accents of English. The blur delights me as I have to take a break and pick a note, a tone from a particular conversation around me, and I start the curious voyage of mapping the local in that global accent. When my characters take off on a voyage, I too plough myself underground or in a bus to a library foyer. My recent discovery is the Crick Institute at King's Cross. DNA brings the local, the specific, and can be applied to any and all ethnicities. The foyer is dressed in white, anonymous, anesthetized. Even the coffee machine goes silent, giving precedence to tea. Its white interiors have a microscopic clarity, and its not quiet is a necessary contrast to the pulse of life on London's roads with its raging traffic. The city provides a circular embrace of life throbbing in the moment. This exhilarating feeling enters the depths of shaping a character, full of form and ambivalences. London does that for me. It is a mobile geography of people settling the way early civilizations did by a riverbank. All types of trade are distributed by water under bridges. Making it happen are millions of multiple selves and their tongues living in a space. Accepting and rejecting incomers, but always holding the gate open for those who want to leave, as it makes room for newcomers and very occasionally returnees. Where else can I walk and stumble on a pavement stone, engraved with a contemplation by Wordsworth about the Thames, or by the Chelsea embankment, gaze by the full moon night, and blank my sight from electricity and tail lights of evening traffic, and look at the moon overhead, and actually hear the lulling waves of high tide, and murmur to myself across Albert Bridge, looking at the point where Turner would spend a full moon night painting the dark to illuminate matters of light.
That was a lovely piece of writing.
Wasn't it?
And I think the way she talks about London being full of contradictions as well, and I think that's I relate to that.
And the creativity personified in a city.
Yeah.
Dickensian almost.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And it does resonate with me because I'm also trying to write a children's story about London in the 19th century.
Are you?
Which is a new thing for me, really, because my books are non-fiction, generally. But London has a sort of magic, I think, even though some of it, like some of the city, I find it quite disgusting.
Yeah.
You know, but some years ago, quite a long time ago, so it must be about nearly 20 years ago, I was working regularly for a newspaper.
Yes.
And that finished. And I thought, that's it. There will be no more work. I'll have to do something completely different, drama queen.
Yeah.
And so I signed on to do a City of London guide course.
Oh.
Now, this is completely bonkers because I've got no sense of direction whatsoever. I mean, a very, very strong, wrong sense of direction.
So I bet it was a brilliant tour.
Well, I scraped part. I got my exam and everything, but wonderful people. There were such different people working.
Yes.
There were a beadle, and then
a real beadle.
Yes, and in fact,
a live beadle. Right.
Yes. And in fact, I interviewed some beadles years later, and they're very good to interview because they love telling stories.
Yes,
So there's a juggler, a beadle, loads of interesting people. And as I said, I was a bit useless because of the sense of direction, but so interesting.
Where did you go? What was your beat?
City.
Right.
No, I never guided.
Okay.
After I'd finished, I started getting more work.
Right.
And I wrote a children's book, non-fiction, about London, about the smells and colours and sounds of London. again, massively over-researched.
What do you mean by massively over-researched?
Well, because I tend to ask tons of questions and only ever there's like a short sentence as a result.
But that's all part of it, is it? I mean,
well, I love it. But I think London has... obviously, London reinvents itself all the time.
Yeah.
I'm very keen on the river because that means it's kind of like a connection to the sea. And according to my mum, I was virtually born in the sea because she lived in a house right on went down to the beach.
In Devon?
Yeah, in Paynton. And she swam all the year round. And according to her, she's had a pain and then made it back to the house and gave birth to me. So, but if that's true, I should be a good swimmer. I'm not, but I love the sea. I absolutely love it. I like the river. And I have done a bit of mudlarking. Although you're supposed to have a permit now.
Is that when you go and just see what the tide has revealed? You
dig a bit. I just scuff with my feet. I don't dig.
Sort of half-hearted mudlarker. What did you find?
I've never found anything terribly exciting. I'm very short-sighted, so probably found pipe stems because they're quite common. And I was on a bit of the river on the north bank, and it was not a very nice day, and I was the only person on the shore, I thought, and I couldn't find anything, but I found a nice smooth pebble. And I got my felt tip pen and I drew a face on it. And suddenly this man came up to me and said, "Oh, what have you found?" And I said, I showed it to him and he said, That's wonderful. I've never found a pebble with a face on it before. And I couldn't tell him that I'd just drawn it, you know. And he said, I've got something in my pocket, can I swap it with? And I said, well, if you must. And he took out this, like a marble. It wasn't a marble, I think it was shot, you know, a piece of shot. Yeah. He said, if I give that to you, will you give me that wonderful pebble with the face on it? And I said, yes, if you like. But I don't really know what to say.
Where was that?
It was Sugar Quay, I think, on the north bank of the Thames. Oh, the other thing that happened, I'll tell you another thing. When I was doing my London book, I wanted to find out where the River Fleet flowed into the Thames. Yeah. And at low tide, you can see it, right? So I went down and there was a metal ladder. It was by Blackfriars Station. There were lots of workmen working on Blackfriars. And I started to climb down, and then the workman started calling, saying, "What are you doing, love? What are you doing?" I said, I'm looking for the fleet. I'm looking for the fleet. And they said, "Oh, no, love, you don't want to do that. That's really dangerous. What you want to do is to go to the station, stand on platform 4, and you'll get a much better view and it will be safer."
Really?
And it was. So I put it in my book.
Oh, wow.
Because I don't want to encourage kids to
of course,
climb down. You know?
Yeah, so if anyone's listening to this, don't climb down.
Health and safety. Don't climb like Sally Kindberg. No, but you can see it. And it's not very exciting, actually.
It's more exciting the way you're telling it.
Well, the idea of it, of the river.
You're quite an adventurer.
Not really.
Talking about your adventures, were you a teacher at the Elfland School?
Oh.
You went all the way to Elfland.
I was a travel writer for a while, for 2 years. And I tried to set up this visit to Iceland. And at the time I was doing work for the Evening Standard. And I wrote to the elf headmaster for about a year, saying, "Please, can I come to one of your classes?" And he was very elusive. And eventually he said, "Oh, all right, come." And I told the Evening Standard, and they were quite excited about it. And it was in Reykjavik. And they set up a photographer, and I got the flight and everything, and all sorts of things went wrong. I got to Reykjavik and I phoned the headmaster and he said, "I'm sorry, the class is off." And I said, No, you can't do this. I've just flown here and I've got a photographer coming. And he said, well, you can come, but you will be the only student, as well as my niece and a black dog.
What you're describing there leads us beautifully into sort of like the final segment, which I'd like to ask you about. This repeatedly asking someone to let you come and share something reminds me of the travails of trying to get an agent, a literary agent. Sometimes you can knock as a writer and then never reply or whatever, or a publisher. In your comic strip world, do you need to have an agent in the sort of...
I've managed to a long, long time not to have an agent.
Right.
I had an agent very briefly, but he was getting me work that I could have got myself, basically. And what I've done, and I don't think you can do it now, really, is I did a sort of sideways move, because I was illustrating, and then it was in ye old days when you could take work round and say, hey, look at this, and they'd go, yeah. Or, it was mostly the dismissive bit. And then and that's how I got into travel writing, because I went to see a magazine with drawings, and the editor of the magazine said, well, we haven't got anything for you, but do you write? I said, yeah. And he said, well, my friend he's the travel editor of, so let me ring him. I mean, these things don't happen.
Yeah.
I got on a golfing holiday, which I was absolutely rubbish at.
You don't like golf?
No, I was just rubbish at it. But I had a wonderful French golf pro.
Yeah.
And everything I did, great chunks of the green flew up into the air. This was in France. He said, that is wonderful, madame. That is so wonderful. That kind of thing.
That's what you want to hear from an agent, isn't it?
I know.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm going to have to get... go on.
You're going to have to get one, do you reckon?
I think so, yeah.
So if there's someone listening to this now, I know your advice maybe to be someone who wants to go your path would be, to read Rumpelstiltskin as a child, go to Nottingham, climb into the River Thames, go to Elfland. But what...
I know what is the advice.
Yeah, what would... If someone's listening and thinking, I would love to follow Sally, how can I get into that line of things?
How to get into...
Yeah, to sell, if they're a good artist and a good wordsmith as well.
I think what I would say to people is to be curious about absolutely everything and keep a notebook. Keep notebooks. I've got thousands of notebooks, but I don't know how to get an agent. And I think the trouble is that most of my contacts are either dead or retired, so I haven't got any contacts. So, but I will. I mean, it's knocking on doors, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
And that never changes.
No, it never.
And now here's Anne Morgan with the latest RLF news.
The true story of history's most beloved panda, a subversive poetry collection, and a provocative study of creating art that opposes mainstream culture are among the latest titles by Royal Literary Fund Fellows hitting the bookshop shelves. Maisie Chan's new children's book, Chi-Chi the Panda, has been published by Hachette. Illustrated by Joe Lindley, it tells the true story of Chi-Chi, a panda from Beijing in China, who became the subject of an international argument and ended up as the star attraction at London Zoo. Meanwhile, Carcanet has released Martina Evans's new poetry collection, Drunken Driving, which has been named the Poetry Book Society Summer Choice for 2026. The subversive sequel to her narrative poem, The Coming Thing, the book catches up with central character Imelda 10 years on, when she gets a job in the X-ray department at Pentonville Prison and learns to drive, and finds her previous preoccupations with life and death and abuse of power are intensified. And in non-fiction, Faber will be publishing Courtier Newland's The Art of Opposition, on hope, resilience and creative expression beyond the mainstream, on the 30th of July. It sees novelist and screenwriter Newland reflecting on what it means to be an artist operating in the margins, considering which voices are allowed full freedom of artistic expression and which are not, the importance of reading outside the white Western canon, and how success shapes the work of historically excluded creatives. For more information, visit the publishers' websites. An RLF Fellows adaptation of short stories by RLF beneficiary Dylan Thomas has been broadcast on BBC Radio 4. Joe Dunthorne's new radio play, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dog, is set in Swansea, where both he and Thomas were born. Comic, nostalgic, with a host of vivid characters, this autobiographical coming-of-age story stars Gerin Howell as Dylan Thomas. It is available to listen on BBC Sounds. And finally, anyone attending Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival has the opportunity to catch regular Collected presenter Doug Johnston discussing 2 decades of writing crime fiction. Still killing it, 20 years of Doug Johnston, will see the author in conversation with Chris Brookmeyer at 3 p.m. on Friday the 24th of July on the Old Swan Hotel's Swift Half stage. The event celebrates 20 years since Doug Johnston's debut and the release of his 20th book, and we'll see him exploring how his work has evolved and the stories that shaped his career. For more information, visit harrogateinternationalfestivals.com. And now, back to the studio.
Sally, thank you very much. I found it fascinating. I think people will love to hear about your many adventures, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you have any comments or questions, please use the hashtag RLFCollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by Noise and Order. Our producer was Anne Morgan.